Hey, this is Brandon with Pickleball Effect. Today we're going to review the new R1 Nova by Ronbus. This is a new take on a thermoform paddle. I didn't think that we were going to get any paddles with new technology before the year was over, but Ronbus proved me wrong. People love the way thermoform paddles play, but there is still that delamination and core crush issue that can happen with them. Although they're better than they were when they first came out, they're still not perfect. And so Ronbus is trying to solve for that issue with the way they designed this paddle. So this paddle still has the unibody design with the foam injection, but instead of doing a full carbon seam around the perimeter, they're using this weave carbon seam instead. So if you look at this picture, you can see a traditional thermoform paddle with the full carbon seam next to the Nova, which has that weave carbon pattern. So Ronbus believes that this full carbon seam is part of the reason why paddles are having this core crushing issue. So this is a really cool concept of a paddle that is still thermoformed, though it's a little bit differently, and could potentially solve that durability issue. And they sent me this really cool video of the Nova in a machine being hit against a ball 10,000 times over the course of 7 hours. And then they cut the paddle in half and compared it to a brand new Nova, and the cores do look the same. But the big question on my mind is, does the paddle still play like a thermoform paddle, even though it's not built quite the same? So before we jump to the playtest, let's talk about a couple specs of the Nova. So this is an elongated shape with a 5.5 inch handle and a 16 millimeter core. This is the only shape they offer right now. I know they're coming out with an R3 version, but both of them will be 16 millimeters thick. So a couple of things that stand out to me here is first the average weight of 7.8 ounces. This is a very lightweight paddle. You don't see paddles weigh 7.8 ounces very often, especially the ones with a thicker 16 millimeter core and with the thermoform design that just typically has more material than past generation paddles. So I'm not sure what they did to get that lighter weight. Maybe they use a less dense foam around the perimeter, but it's a very light measurement. And then we have a very low measurement for swing weight at 115. So again, for a thicker core paddle that's elongated, you don't see this low of a swing weight very often. So I think the lighter weight and lighter swing weight is going to be really attractive to a lot of people. But the one downside to this is the lower twist weight. So lighter weights typically have lower twist weights, which is what we're seeing here at 5.82. So this is below average. I imagine this isn't going to be quite as stable as most of the traditional thermoform paddles, so that's something I'll be paying attention to in my play test. But this is the Ronbus R1 Nova. Let's go put it on the court and see how it plays.
After drilling and playing with the paddle for over 2 weeks, here's my review of its performance. In a nutshell, addressing the big question of whether it retains the qualities of a typical thermoform paddle, the answer is no. It doesn't quite maintain that identical feel and performance. Instead, it introduces a subtle variation in gameplay and performance. Compared to traditional thermoform paddles, it has a softer feel and offers less pop. The feel is a little crisper than paddles like the Yola Hyperion CFS 16 or the Vatic Pro Prism series that are not thermoformed, but it's softer than your traditional thermoform paddle. The ball doesn't pop off the face as quickly, so it's easier to absorb pace off the ball for drops and resets, though power from the baseline is similar to less powerful thermoform paddles like the Ronbus R1 Pulsar or the Yola Perseus 16mm. So it has this crisp, softer feel with baseline power. It's a nice combination. I decided to categorize it as a control paddle, though it's an offensive styled control paddle. It has a good control rating, though it's not as easy to control as a pure control paddle like say the Vatic Pro Prism series or the original carbon paddles. On the offensive side, you could put some good pace on serves, drives, and overheads, but you can still hit delicate attacks at the net when you need to take some pace off and add some topspin. The ball sits on the face a little longer than your typical thermo, so finding hard angles when making contact below the net was easier to do, and I liked that. However, the pop wasn't always enough on counters and punch volleys to finish points and put added pressure on your opponents the same way you could with a standard thermo. When it came to spin, my RPM test came in around 1900, which is a great result and barely qualifies it for my very high spin paddle category, but it's not the highest spinning paddle on the market. I found that it had plenty of spin for me to do what I needed. Additionally, the lighter average weight and swing weight of the paddle did make it easy to maneuver, especially compared to other elongated shaped paddles. Not everything was great though. The big downside to the paddle was its lower stability and forgiveness rating. The paddle has a lower twist weight number, and that translated to a smaller sweet spot. It's a playable sweet spot, but it's certainly not oversized like your typical thermoform paddle and won't necessarily do you any favors. I noticed a few times each game where I thought the ball might have stayed in play if I was playing with a more forgiving paddle. There are a lot of good things to say about the paddle, but its lower forgiveness rating gives it a higher skill ceiling required to fully utilize it. However, because it's lighter weight, it's easy to add lead tape without its swing weight and static weight going crazy on you. So I ended up adding two 4-inch strips of lead tape, an overgrip, and some edge guard tape, and this is how it changed the paddle's measurements. The weight increased to 8.4 ounces, while the twist weight improved to 6.67, which made the sweet spot noticeably better and much easier to play with. Then the swing weight increased to 120, and it did feel heavier, though it wasn't outrageous. Many elongated paddles out there come in heavier stock swing weights. Though the paddle did lose its easier maneuverability that I mentioned earlier and was now more of an average for an elongated shape. I thought this setup brought the best out of the paddle, and I liked it more this way rather than stock. So here's my recommendation. I thought the paddle was good out of the box, but the smaller sweet spot made it less player friendly. Once you add some lead tape, it made it a great paddle that I would describe as a control paddle with more offensive ability. If you don't want to mess with lead tape, then I'd recommend looking elsewhere. But if you don't mind customizing your paddle with tape, and you want a good control paddle that doesn't give up all of its offensive ability, then this paddle is one you should consider. But if you were just hoping for a more durable paddle that played just like a typical thermoform paddle, then this isn't it. When it comes to the durability improvement claims from Ronbus, only time will tell, but the video they shared with me doing the 10,000 hits was pretty convincing, and I didn't experience any delamination or core crushing issues during my playtest. So that's everything I have for you. If this is a paddle you're interested in, you can use my code 10effect for a discount on Ronbus's website. I'll include a link to it in my description. Thanks for watching, and I hope it helped.